3.8,
the
number
last one.
10.
Oh, 7.
Oh, yeah. 7. Okay, so this argument is unsound, for its conclusion is false, and no sound argument has a false conclusion. Okay.
Everyone knows that.
Okay, in your video, your presentation, you'll give an explanation of why this argument is sound.
So the first thing we do is we show that it's a valid argument, and then we demonstrate that the argument is unsound.
Okay, so we can demonstrate that it is valid using a truth tree, and we know that it's unsound because why?
Because there's a contradiction.
Okay, but in terms of the definition, this is where we always want to be focused on when we ask whether an argument is sound or unsound. Another way of phrasing that is, does this argument meet the definition of soundness? So you always want to frame things in terms of the definition, and these are technical definitions. So it's a little
several places where soundness is defined. I couldn't find the one which was appropriate because he applies soundness of his tree technique.
Right. Well, that's different. That's a different use of soundness.
So I can't.
Well, in a way, well, they're related, but it is different.
But in several places, he has the box.
Yes.
That says soundness, and even in the
but just
table
from
of contents,
just from philosophy 106, soundness is a sound argument is
a valid argument that is also true in real life.
Now that has true premises.
True premises
in real life.
But in true, in that case, we mean true in real life.
In every case. So soundness, that's always the definition of validity or of soundness. So it's a valid argument that has true premises. So it has to meet both criteria. And then just don't get too far away from that definition. So we know that this argument is valid because when we symbolize it, the truth tree works. It shows that it's valid. And then we determine that it's unsound because.
So we look at the two. We suppose two cases.
Premises.
Yeah, we suppose two cases for the premises.
Uh-huh.
One case we suppose the premise to be true, and then the other case we suppose it to be false, and then we follow
both premises or just the first premise.
Well, we start with just the first premise,
okay,
and then and we look at the first. I look at the first premise as if it were true, and then follow its kind of logical path.
Mm-hmm.
And now in the next case, at that same first premise, if it's false, follow its logical path. And when you stop just right there, you can see that you kind of haven't yet resolved between the two, like either one works out. So then you've got to apply the second premise to those cases in order for it to differentiate which one you're going to go with. And so when you apply the second premise to the case where you suppose premise one is true, you find that they're saying opposite things. Premise one is saying the opposite of what premise two is saying. And so that's your conflict.
Okay.
And
yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of the definition, again, you're kind of drifting away from the definition. The valid argument that has all true premises. So you can assume that all the premises are true and then find a contradiction. And that, by the method of indirect proof, by reductio ad absurdum, tells us that one of the premises is false. Why didn't you choose that the second premise be false?
Oh, because in the second case where you presume the first premise to be false, then the logical path results in that the argument is unsound, and then the second premise it makes no claim about unsound arguments. And so it doesn't refute case 2. And so whereas it refutes case 1. So you can't use case 1 in the case where the first premise is true, because it's refuted because it concludes this is a sound argument, but then premise 2 says, well, sound arguments can't have false conclusions, which is what premise 1 is saying. And so they're saying opposite, they're saying different things. And so that case, the entire case just blows up. It's absurd. And so then case 2 is the only one that allows you to use all your premises without things exploding on you.
All right. And then premise 2, no sound argument has a false conclusion. Is that true or false? No sound argument has a false conclusion.
But that's a true statement in real life.
That's a true statement in real life. We know that to be true by the definition of soundness.
Right.
So the definition of soundness is really the key here.
Yeah.
And that's really what this problem is about, is getting the definition of soundness straight in our head.
It has to be, I think you could also say it, can't you, as a valid argument that has consistent statements, consistent premises. Because it's only the valid arguments that have inconsistent premises. Yeah.
Well, you could say that, yeah. If the premises are inconsistent, and we know that one of the premises is false, at least one is false. Mm-hmm. And that's how we get these results logically, rather than going out in the world and examining the world to find out whether the premises are true. Is because the premises are inconsistent in one way or another. So we've discovered in our previous work that a valid argument can have inconsistent premises. Mm-hmm. And what, interestingly, do we find here is an unsound argument can have a true conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah, this one, the premises are, there is a case where all the premises are true and the conclusion is true, mm-hmm. and yet it is unsound.
And we know this logically, we know this absolutely, that the conclusion of this argument is true due to the logic of the argument itself. Nonetheless, it is an unsound argument. And that's precisely the conclusion of the argument. So that's an interesting result. So throughout the book, Jeffrey is pointing us to these things that we may not intuitively think can happen. That you can have an unsound argument with a true conclusion. And here it's self-referentially true, saying that this very argument is unsound. Precisely because it is unsound.
Yeah.
Which is a little weird. Right.
Yeah, I thought, like, in the case where we had to invent a new shape to answer the question that he may have been thinking of, the trivial case. Because
the other problem. Yeah.
Because in that one, the rules were silent on the TT and FF case. Mm-hmm. And so if you set up a trivially valid, you went with a trivially valid example, then the TT and FF cases, they can be whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And so then you could answer the question, assuming trivially valid, without needing a third shape. So I thought maybe he was going.
I'd have to see what that looks like. I can't quite picture that.
Because in my zeal to try to find a circle, triangle only. I came up with examples where I could get circle and triangle, I think, to be what I needed them to be. But then my
But it didn't.
tautologies didn't work out.
Right.
But they need not to if I say, well, here's an example, which would be a trivially valid case. And in that case, everything would be fine.
So would you say that this argument is trivially valid?
No.
Yeah.
Because I did the truth table.
Uh-huh.
That's why I know. It's the FF case is TTT.
Uh-huh. Because, I think you're leaning in too heavily to this trivially valid sort of notion. Validity is just a formal characteristic. It is what it is. And so, I mean, it's almost like all validity is trivial.
Well, I think the difference is that you give me any formally invalid form, and I can make it valid. It'll be trivially valid and unsound.
You can give you any what?
Give me any invalid form, right? And I can make it valid just by giving it an absurdity. A and not A, or not A and not A. It would be trivially valid and unsound, but it would still be valid.
But the premises here are inconsistent. So wouldn't this be trivially valid?
No, because there's a trivially valid is only where you have inconsistent premises.
Well, the premises are inconsistent in this argument. The first premise.
If my truth table was wrong in the false case, I get true.
Right, but to say that they're inconsistent means that there's no case where they're all true.
Right, I'm not claiming those are inconsistent.
But they are. But what I'm saying is these premises are inconsistent. In fact,
maybe in real life.
Yes, in real life.
But I'm just meaning in the test of validity. That's the test of soundness. I'm saying in the test of validity.
But even in terms of the test of validity, these premises, there's no case.
Then why did my truth tree work out and say valid?
Because in the truth table, you're saying, that they,
in the FF case, because it's all
when the first premise is false and the second premise is false.
Yeah, because it's not the first premise, right? It's not CA, which makes that one true.
All right,
and etc. So you end up with a case. That's why it's valid. It's not trivially valid. It's actually valid. Formally valid. Say it that way.
But even if there's no true case, where both premises are true, it's still formally valid.
Oh, but it'd be trivially valid though.
That's what you mean by trivially valid. Trivially valid is there's no scenario
where all premises are true in that interpretation.
But here, in fact,
both
premises can't be true.
Not in real life, but they can be logically.
Formally. Okay. All right. Well, that's an interesting distinction.
Because it's easy. It's an easy problem if it's invalid. I don't have to go any further to say it's unsound. I say it's invalid, it's unsound. Done. So what makes it hard is that it is a valid, formally valid argument. And I can show that through the tree or through the table. And so now you're stuck with, okay, is it sound? And then it's only because, if you will, in real life, they're saying opposite things.
Well, it's only because of the self-referentiality.
Yeah.
That makes it.
Right.
That we can actually find that the first premise must be false.
If it said that argument, then might be okay. Some other argument.
All right. So again, just to emphasize the point, this argument is unsound. And it has a true conclusion. And we know that its conclusion is true, even though the argument is unsound. Which may be unexpected.
Maybe what?
Maybe unexpected, an unexpected result. That you can have an unsound argument of which you are absolutely certain that its conclusion is true.
Oh, well, that's okay, because there's plenty of cases where the conclusions work out despite the premises.
Right.
You know,
It's just here that it's a priori.
Yeah, you have to write it out to show. The gut feeling tells you it's not sound, but I can't put it into words just looking at it. I have to write it out to demonstrate the unsoundness.
Right.
So so all of this, the good news is that there's a 5-minute video. Just watch that one. It's written out cleanly, and then hopefully it makes sense. And I guess I can take your point that I didn't need to do the second case. All I had to show was that assuming all premises true, I end up in an absurdity. I'm done. But
yeah,
I did the extra to show it does work out the other way, which demonstrates unsound.
And with a confusing problem like this, you probably do want to check just to make sure it all works out.
Yeah.
And of course that's at the end of the day, like when you do, when you give the official sort of answer to things, you cut out a lot of the things that you explore, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And you just like,
there's like 8 pages that I'm not showing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the thing. And so, but in terms of when you're actually working through the problems, you do want to explore everything, make sure that you really understand it,
Yeah.
And even if you include that in your presentation, I think in this case, it is interesting and informative to go ahead and go through that just to make sure the audience understands that it does work out the other way.
Yeah.
Right. It's not, you're not just like glossing over some difficult.
Right. Cherry picking in order to arrive at a certain answer.
Right.
Yeah.
How about interpretations? Did this all make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So, he starts.
Formations got me for a little while, but then that ended up being helpful because then working my way through how to do the formation tree, which is the other way around,
sort of back.
Then that illuminated some of the inner workings, and then I felt comfortable now with existential instantiation and universal instantiations. I was more comfortable with those. I was getting the answers that I thought were the right answers, but that was more through mechanics.
Right. And
then by having to do the formation tree, now it was kind of more of a through knowledge, being able to answer.
I think that there's some connection there too, intuitively, with the notions of soundness and completeness in connection with the truth tree.
We haven't gotten to completeness yet.
Okay, so there's soundness of the truth tree, there's also completeness. And it especially is relevant to existential instantiation. So there might be something there that's
And then
that's
take note that you need to do the existential instantiations before you do the universals. Or
I mean, you don't have to. It's just well,
because universals can only use existing letters. Existentials have to use new letters.
yeah. I mean, you can do universal instantiation and just use new letters. It's just usually that's a waste. And sometimes
it's against the rule, his rule.
One of the
Maybe the Rodney rule allows.
I think it seems like I was working some problem later in the book where you had to do universal instantiation before existential instantiation, because the way it was, like, the existential instantiation was embedded inside of a universal.
Was it a negated universal? That's the only. Oh, I see. Universal of an existential.
Yeah, where the scope of the universal
Encompassed an existential.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
So you might have something.
Maybe the rule is just when you have the existential on its own line, where the line begins with that. But I'm only through chapter 3, so, and he promises to change the rules later anyway.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the thing, is he does kind of modify the rules.
Yeah, like we can only use X's right now. We only have one variable.
This is a brand new pen. It does not work. Okay. So you might have for all X, I think this is, some kind of example. Here, I have something like that.
Yeah. So you get to keep reusing the existential, because you could pop out
And do another
a
universal.
GA only if existential Y, blah, 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 and then consume that existential, changing your Y's to B's, but then you can now instantiate a new universal, G is GC only if existential Y.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay.
There's stuff like that comes up.
That's not chapter 3.
I think I think this is chapter 4.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, because chapter 4 is multiple generalization. So chapter 3 is about generalization using quantifiers. And then chapter 4 is multiple generalization, where you have multiple quantifiers in the same statement. And then they can even get embedded like this.
Right. Your F there has 2 variables.
Yeah, and he does revise the rules in chapter 4.
Okay.
Yeah. But that is a good rule in general. Whenever possible, do your existentials before your universals, because usually your universals are only useful once you have everything existentially instantiated. Otherwise, you're just burning variables.
Right. And you could send yourself off into a wild.
And then your
existential can only use new ones.
Your interpretation of the truth tree then will be off.
Yeah.
You might have superfluous variables.
Yeah. And isn't it the case that the existentials must use new variables?
They must.
So if you consume the variable you need with the universal.
Well, it's just, instead of it being A, it'll be B, but then A could just be hanging out there with really no purpose.
Yeah. Oh, computer programming helps with, I think, understanding kind of what's happening.
Well, and he tries to put it in that framework with like the flow charts and the rules of formation also are rules that you could program a computer to build up all possible statements. In principle, it's kind of like pseudocode for putting together a program that builds up all possible statements.
I added a new rule of equivalence to my 106 list. Based on
what's that?
What was it? It must have been the not conjunction.
Not conjunction.
Because we don't have that one. There's no name for it.
De Morgan. The negation of the conjunction is the disjunction of the negations. We have two different forms of De Morgan in traditional setting.
Yeah, it wasn't that one. I'll look it up here.
There are a few, rules like that, even like a destructive dilemma. That would be a nice rule to have, but traditionally we don't. And when we're introducing proofs, that's not a move that's allowed.
Pretty sure it's it was not P only if Q. Therefore, P and not Q.
Oh,
so that was a new one.
We don't have the negation.
Negation of implication is what I called it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
No E or nine.
We could even just say this is logical equivalent.
Right, because this is in the rules of, what we called in 106 rules of equivalence.
Yeah. And so that's very helpful.
Yeah, I could have used that.
Yeah.
Last semester.
And in real life, I mean, if you're really doing a proof, this is a perfectly valid move.
Yeah.
Like, and depending on your audience, they should be able to follow that. That should be a one step. It shouldn't be multiple steps.
It's only a 4-row truth table if they don't believe you.
Right. Well, I mean, if they don't believe you, then you're dealing with a pretty rudimentary audience. But this is a very important move.
Add it to 106 and give it the.
And that's what's kind of nice too about Jeffrey's text is he kind of just nudges us into this kind of more sophisticated way of looking at proofs, and seeing these rules and everything. Okay, so we got that. So you're just in chapter 3 and there's no more problems in chapter 3.
Right.
Rules of it.
We haven't even read the first page of chapter 4 yet.
Counter example.
One markers.
Okay, so one thing, so there's the rules of formation. Okay, so that's good. And then there are some exercises on rules of formation, right, at the end here?
Yes.
There are. So there is
number 4, problem 4 has you redo 3. Well, it has you make formation trees from the questions 3.
Okay. All right. So a heads up, multiple generality means multiple quantifiers in the same statement. He doesn't use this phrase until after the first set of problems. So what he means by multiple generality is that there are multiple quantifications within the same statement. And that could be for all X and for all Y. Or it can be for all X, exists a Y, and lots of different combinations.
We got a taste of that earlier because they were talking about, we have A, B's, and C's sometimes. And so in the discussions, not in the problems. With the lovers and who knows who.
Yeah. There
wasn't A, B's, and C's.
But X's and Y's. Because now we're going to get X, Y, Z. We're going to get W, X, Y, Z. And this is an important principle to keep in mind. If you have two universal quantifiers, the X and Y might be identical.
They could both be A.
Yeah. Unless there's something that rules that out, you can assume this is a valid inference.
Simplification.
Yeah. So in some cases, it's important to do RAA to get the correct result. So don't think that that's ruled out. Just because X and Y are different variables doesn't mean they don't refer to the same object in our interpretation.
Not the case for existential.
No, you could. So that is one thing. Like, let's say that you have you instantiate an existential quantifier, and you say there exists A such that blah blah blah, and then later on you say another existential instantiation, there exists B such that blah 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 blah. You may find out that A and B are identical.
But you can't write them as both.
But you can't.
Whereas the universal, you could write them as both A.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's really the difference. It's a logical difference, but it doesn't. But just because you have to use a new variable for existential instantiation does not mean that we're really picking out a new object.
It's like my father had no sons except for one.
Yeah.
It ends up being I am A and that person's B and that's also me.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's so that person is an existential quantifier.
Yeah, he had that problem in chapter 3, I think.
Oh, right. Yeah. And you saw the knights and knaves too, right?
Yes, they were very familiar.
That's where patricians and proles come from. And from the book that he puts in the footnote, which is a very famous book.
I think I found that book last semester, but then you stopped following it.
Yeah, that's what I figured, is that at some point students might figure out where these are coming from, but then I was throwing in curveballs. Right?
It's too late.
I was changing the problem just slightly.
Yeah.
Some of them are just straight out of the book, but some of them are.
If you were handy with Google, you could find the source of the problem.
Yeah, if you ask ChatGPT, maybe.
I didn't ask him.
Well, ChatGPT doesn't give you any sources, but
the Bing one does now, I'm told.
It does,
just for that reason, so that way you could go check it.
Right, because they're kind of trying to use it as a search engine, right? That's
like an enhanced
search engine. Yeah. Which is an interesting idea.
As long as people will complain about, well, how can you trust Wikipedia? You don't have to trust Wikipedia, but you can start there.
And you can follow the footnotes. And
then follow the footnotes or derive it yourself, but it gives you like using it for your proof, you can use it as an example and then see if you...
Well, then the alternative, this used to be a big thing, is that the professors have come around on Wikipedia, but they used to really be, they would talk down Wikipedia a lot.
Well, go fix it then, Professor.
Yeah. Well, and then what I found students doing when they'd come to me, they would avoid using Wikipedia, which usually has the right answers, and they would just pick some random website by Joe Schmo and act like, it's somehow an authoritative source. Joe Schmo said, I was like, well, okay.
From Alpha, that one works out well. Because they'll show you how the problem is solved. Like math problems.
Oh, Wolfram.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's what Wolfram, combined the same language model of ChatGPT with Wolfram Alpha explanation, scientific explanation. Yeah, it gives really good results. Yeah, I was always impressed with Wolfram Alpha.
Yeah.
How well, even calculus.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
It gives really step-by-step sort of
even when you write it wrong, it's like, did you mean this or did you mean this? Oh, I meant that one. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So you seem like you don't have any questions. Oh.
No, I just need to catch up. I'm looking forward to the spring break because I'm behind from the schedule by 3 days.
Okay, well that's not
2
bad.
days or 3 days, but so
well
I've been reading Spinoza.
You'll be you'll be able to catch up until I give you the next most difficult problem.
Yeah, I can wait until Wednesday.
So this is very important. These what I call pseudo English, right?
Yeah.
For every x, there exists a y such that x loves y. And so that's very good pseudo English to keep handy. So if you're not, and is a good bridge when you're going from symbolic representation into English, start out with something that looks like this and then try to phrase it more elegantly.
I try to use that language in my presentation when I'm reading the symbols.
And then this is the big thing about multiple generality is that you got to keep your x's and y's straight.
Okay.
So with our predicates, the order of the variables which come after the predicate, the capital letters, though that ordering is built into the predicate. So X loves Y.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that Y loves X, right? It's an asymmetrical relationship. It's not always asymmetrical, but you have to assume that until there's something that tells you that it's symmetrical.
Why is it called a predicate and it leads the word?
Okay, that's
not a suffix.
Okay, good. Subject.
Yeah.
So
or prefix.
Let's talk about that actually, because he doesn't go into this. He just what the thing is, even when I was a kid, when things were changing, I was taught to diagram sentences.
Yeah, we did that.
I spent a half a year in 11th grade with Mr. Cardino yelling at me to get the diagram straight, right? This is like old-fashioned.
He had the ruler. He was hitting you across the hand.
No, you didn't even need a ruler. You just needed to make a Schneider. He didn't really yell that much either. He just oh, really?
Here we go again, Rodney. It just predicate is like I don't know, like an after, right?
Oh, right. No, the ordering is not intuitive.
Okay.
Right. So ducks swim. This is kind of the simplest sort of sentence that we have, and this is
subject and
subject and predicate. And in general, all proper sentences in English can be divided into subject and predicate. And those are the two major parts of a sentence. You could say ducks swim silently. And then this is going to be an adverb. And of course, this is going to be a verb. That's part of the predicate. This is an adverb.
It modifies the verb.
That modifies the verb, yes. And of course, when we do actual graphing, the graphical representation, but I assume most people, in our class have never graphed a sentence. So let's not get into that. But I have thought about doing that sort of in the first weeks of this course. If there were more time, if it weren't so hard to get through the book. Because we saw how long it took to get through chapter 1, right? But I did actually change the schedule this time around to make chapter 1, to rush us through chapter 1. Because in the past, I got bogged down in chapter 1.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
but I think
it's a big anchor.
Yeah. And so you can also have something like Fred is hungry, right? And this is still subject predicate. And so we would symbolize, you might want to say Fred is hungry.
Oh, I see now.
Right? But conventionally, it usually does go this way, that the object or the subject comes after the predicate.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But in some textbooks, you will see the subject come after. But then even have direct objects that come afterwards. So like if we have Alma loves Baron. This is a big example.
Yeah. Little a, big L, little b.
Right. So we still have subject and predicate. This is the verb. And this is the direct object. Right? And so in Jeffrey's notation, we have Alma loves the Baron. But there are texts where they would do something like this. Alma loves the Baron. But this is more conventional.
Okay.
And so and you might think of it more in terms of like function notation. If you had something like this in math.
Yes, that's how I think of it.
Yeah. So I think this is where it comes from. There's a connection here in the early part of the 20th century before either of these conventions were fully established. And then they just kind of went their separate ways.
I think what's her name wrote that way, didn't she?
What's that?
The parentheses, Amy was the lady who invented programming.
Lovelace?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe so. But then she would have been
her pseudo code.
Yeah, but then she would have been Lovelace was steeped in the innovations in logic of her day. Right? So this notation all goes back that far. But was still up in the air in the early 20th century. But then in the mid 20th century, we get some standardization, especially in the United States and England, English speaking Australia. But now, now logic is falling out of favor. So who knows what will happen. But there is this kind of simplification. In math, we're much more inclined to do this. which kind of seems like a waste of strokes, right? So there is
Well, also, we don't use single letter variables in fourth generation programming. Everything is long words.
Oh, right. I'm thinking more in terms of mathematics. That parentheses looks. Well, that looks pretty normal. That looks like a function, right?
It does, yeah.
And you could have a multi-place function with 4 inputs.
Yeah.
And it's just whatever the function is determines what you do with those inputs.
And you can also have just a blank input, no comma, and you just, for this instance, I don't have an input for the second variable. You just put a comma.
You just leave it blank. Yeah.
Yeah.
In math, you just leave like an X or a Y or something, right? An open variable.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so with this kind of notation, you might say, a squared plus b squared. But here, what determines how we interpret A and B and their function is from the grammar, the English grammar.
Yeah.
And it depends on what sort of content you attribute to the form. But when we do the truth trees, all we care about is the form.
Yeah.
And we really don't know. We really don't know how A and B function. Formally, in terms of the symbols, we don't know that A is the subject and B is the direct object.
Yeah.
That's all comes from an interpretation that involves some sort of content. And so we do need to not lean too heavily on the English grammar, but know that behind it is some kind of English grammar. It has to be some kind of English grammar. And so our capital letters, our capital variables are predicates in this sense. And a predicate could be a verb with a direct object. It could be something that merely describes the subject, as Fred is hungry. And it could be and involving a copula. The is the copula. Fred is hungry. Or you could have something without the copula where it's just sort of describing what the ducks are doing. All those things are kind of open, but nonetheless, the capital letter is going to be a predicate of some sort. The lowercase letters are going to be objects within our interpretation. But you don't know if those objects are the subject or the direct object, or if they're objects which are related by the predicate.
Could they be non-nouns?
No, they have to be nouns. They have to be objects.
Alma loves passionately. Alma loves.
Yeah, and one of them has to be the subject. Right? But we also can phrase, and so it is a little open too, and we'll see this in Jeffrey, is that Alma loves the Baron is equivalent to the Baron subject is loved by Alma. So here B could be interpreted as the subject, or A could be interpreted as the subject. And those are different grammatical constructions, but symbolically, they're reduced to the same thing. And this is the thing about extensions. So when we talk about the differences in grammar, so maybe I should write this down. and Jeffrey doesn't go into much detail about this, but this is interesting from the perspective of the philosophy of language and the philosophy of logic, is we have subject and predicate. And so we could have Alma loves the Baron, or we could have the Baron as subject is loved. This is describing the Baron by Alma with an adjectival modifier. Both of these are symbolized by this. And so the meaning that we give here in English grammar, the difference here is a difference of intention. So do you intend for Alma to be the subject, or do you intend for the Baron to be the subject? And that all has to do with the nuances of English grammar and what we mean and what we're, there is a difference between saying Alma loves the Baron and the Baron is loved by Alma. There is a connotative difference, and one might be more appropriate for certain contexts.
Telling a story about Alma, and you use one, and you were telling the Baron's story.
Right.
You'd say it differently.
And it draws the reader's attention. Yeah. Who is the protagonist? Right. But our symbolic representation is extensional. It has to do with extension. There is this predicate that relates these objects in some way. We don't know what that relationship is except for the way that those things are determined by the statements at play. And then that's what gives our interpretation. But our interpretation is purely extension. So when we use this word extension in the interpretations, that means we're saying A is Alma, right? B is the Baron. These are objects within our interpretation. The variables point and reference objects, and even our predicates point or reference to the limited relationships within our interpretation that are specified by L, right? And so, like Frege, remember Frege was the guy who wrote the big book on logic, Foundations of Arithmetic. Second volume's coming out, and Bertrand Russell writes him a letter and says, "Oh, sir, I really love the book. However, I think there's a problem." And of course, Russell's paradox destroys Frege's entire system. A lot of his work, and why he's still very relevant today, is that he founded the whole study of the philosophy of language, especially as picked up by Russell and Wittgenstein and Austin, these English professors who operated in England, even though Wittgenstein spoke German and was German, Austrian, he's still an English philosopher. And so Frege made much of the difference here, and he called it the difference between sense and reference. Sometimes we might think that, like the word tree, what is the meaning of the word tree? It's a common conception when we think about what is the meaning of tree to come to some idea, well, tree is a symbol that directs our attention or points to a tree, right? And that's reference, right? But then Frege, right from the beginning, as this is all, becoming relevant, he wants to distinguish sense from reference. And reference is extension, right? That you refer, so extensional interpretations operate only in terms of reference. The sense, we can give different senses, intentional senses, to our construction, but in and of themselves, the symbols only have extensional reference as their meaning. So it's a restricted kind of meaning, so that we restrict our symbols to pure reference. But when we actually go out in the real world, or we want to apply logic to English or any other natural language, we have all these issues of sense. And this is where it's really in terms of sense that most of the philosophical issues arise. The logic, hopefully, we can work out.
Would it be helpful if you translated the English to Latin first? So then you don't have to worry about the word order? Because that's a big problem with English, is the order of the words a lot of times gets different parties.
That's more of an issue of linguistics, not necessarily a question of philosophy. Because when we're talking about, so let's say like universals. This is so in medieval philosophy, they're very grammatical, following Aristotle. Aristotle was very grammatical, very much focused on the grammar. The subject and predicate stuff comes from Aristotle. So in the prior analytics and the entire organon of Aristotle, he's constantly using subject predicate as foundational. But then he, if something sounds like a predicate, it's a predicate. If something sounds like a subject, it's a subject, even if it's a universal, like pure white snow. Purity now becomes a thing. Whiteness is a thing. And of course, snow, we're not going to have a problem with that. But what is whiteness? What is the reference of whiteness? What is white? Can you point to white? I can point to the whiteboard, and it is white, but it isn't whiteness itself. But Aristotle would just say, okay, there's this thing white, because we talk about it. It's in the grammar. And so white there is a universal. It's
Because Alma could love white.
Alma could love white, right?
Aristotle would say she could.
Right.
Yeah.
And we often say things like that. I might say that I love freedom.
What's that?
Can you point to freedom? So reference, so something like freedom that seems so important. There's no obvious reference, right? And so this gets into metaphysics. So universal immediately bring us into a metaphysical sort of discussion, and
They're not sense. It's not sense. Would freedom be a sense?
like a feeling.
Well, yeah, sense and reference.
Well, that's so this distinction is what Frege. This is how Frege tried to work out the problems that come into play when we talk about freedom or whatever. It doesn't entirely work, but he has some very good examples where it does work. What are the names? I can't remember.
Like flowing water.
Well, the example he uses is the morning star and the evening star. They have different names traditionally. I can't remember. But I believe it's in the spring around Easter time. You'll see the evening star and the morning star, and they have traditionally two different names. But so they have two different names, and we take them in traditional sort of astronomy, astrology. They have different connotations and meanings. People thought of them as two different objects, but lo and behold, they turn out to be Venus, right? They refer to the same object. So their reference is the same.
Which is annoying.
But nobody knew that, right? So the sense is entirely different. They're distinct. The intention when we say morning star versus evening star is that they're two different things. That's the intention. That's the sense. But the reference, lo and behold, is actually the same. And so that's interesting. And that's a very good example. And so he gets a lot of mileage out of that. But it doesn't solve all the problems. And universals in particular are a problem because people, if you start talking about whiteness, they're going to like, okay, they're going to start to tune out. But then you start talking about freedom and it's like, well, that is a real thing. Right. So yeah, that operates in our lives, right? So it's so these are just difficulties that and reference doesn't get us there, right? Extensional interpretations, you're not going to have,
Alma loves freedom.
Yeah.
So does Rodney.
And now ultimately in Jeffrey, what we're going to do too for our interpretations is that the objects are numbers. So even 1, can you point to the number 1? You can have one thing, a thing that has, that demonstrates oneness, but is not the number 1 itself.
The modism.
Well, and that's what you start to say, okay, there's all these different things, but it's not as easy as it might seem. Because what about a triangle? There's right triangles, isosceles triangles, scalene triangles, et cetera, et cetera. But what about triangle-ness itself? This is a very Platonic sort of question. Socrates would ask these. Well, but what about the triangle itself? What's that? And the grammar works. It worked in ancient Greek. It works in English. It works in Latin. Changing languages doesn't Doesn't.
Okay.
And this is what, and the fact that it works across multiple languages, even Chinese and, very distinct language types, is what leads like Noam Chomsky to believe that this grammar,
We're on to something here.
that this grammar is somehow genetically programmed in. We don't just merely learn the grammar of our language. There is a universal grammar that's encoded into our biology somehow. But then that means that like these problems, like with whiteness, triangleness, freedom, tyranny, whatever the case may be, justice, the difficulties of grammatically capturing them and being able to say precisely what we mean about these things is also sort of genetically built in. And I don't know, we certainly have, Chomsky hasn't proved that it's genetically built in, but that's his theory. But it nonetheless gets at the issue that philosophical problems don't go away. And they don't change that much. So the same questions that Socrates was asking and the same sort of impasses, the aporia of the Platonic dialogue, where the dialogue's going on, it's like, well, it could be this, and let's see whether it was like, oh, but that doesn't work out. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Let's go, that doesn't work. The impasse of philosophical questions is perennial and persistent. Now, in the early 20th century, working off of Frege, and of course, Russell was very influenced by Frege, and then Wittgenstein was the student of Russell. They're all very much influenced by Frege and trying to leverage sense and reference and blah, 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 blah. There was a whole sort of movement of people, the neo-positivists, who thought that they could do away with metaphysics and do away with a lot of persistent and perennial philosophical questions by just saying that, well, whiteness just doesn't operate. It doesn't have any function in the grammar of ordinary life, especially when we consider the behavioral context. And so we can just do away with these things. And Wittgenstein was a pioneer in this regard, but then soon abandoned that as legitimate, and then argued against that. But there's still a big sort of positivist tendency in the English-speaking world. And you see it like with the Rand Corporation and trying to reduce all of human behavior to game theory and stuff like this. It's neo-positivism that comes out of this sort of trying to eliminate this as much as possible.
Psychohistory.
What's that?
Psychohistory.
What's psychohistory?
Oh, that's from Azimov.
Oh, Azimov.
It's kind of the game. It's basically the game theory, where it only works when you have billions of people.
Large numbers.
But if you given, so the argument is if you're given that number of people and you had enough, you had the right model, you could predict the arc that the society would take.
Right. So that's a very Rand Corporation way of looking at the world. And so this just became sort of almost common knowledge in the mid 20th century. That you could do away with metaphysics and a lot of philosophical problems And it really is just a matter of behavior and statistics. And also, when you start to reduce it to behavior, then it's like, well, okay, then all we have to do is control the behavior and we control the thought. And in many ways, that's, what, the United States imperial hegemony over the last several decades has been about, is you control the economic, we tend to think of it in terms of economics, but you control the economic behavior of people and they start to think right. But that leads to its own sort of tyranny, right? That is a kind of insidious ideological tyranny. And so all these questions now of freedom and democracy, people are starting to ask a lot of questions that just weren't asked several decades ago because of the influence of neo-positivism. Now that the American empire is beginning to decline, the ideological domination is not as effective as it was, right? Yeah. So it's really interesting as you study the history of philosophy to think about that, like Asimov. What would Asimov say about Descartes or Spinoza? How much of that would he just poo-poo, right?
Oh, I think he rolls it in because he knows it now.
Yeah, he certainly does. But but he kind of reinterprets them in functional, extensional terms. And robots, of course, are a good foil for doing that.
Yeah. Because
you think of these robots as being intelligent beings, thinking
purely logical,
thinking things
that are purely logical,
but also obviously mechanically created.
Yeah.
And that's almost the way that Descartes was talking too. He thinks that animals are pure automaton. They just don't have souls like humans have souls. And humans are like automatons, except that we have this soul that is somehow riding the pineal gland. I know he said he doesn't want to say that, but
no, it was just in the book that we were reading, it wasn't there.
Oh, right. Maybe it was somebody else was saying like that, and of course, Descartes doesn't really want to say that, but that is basically what he describes. Is the soul is somehow.
Oh, right. He doesn't
somehow riding the pineal gland.
Yeah, no. He says
like a pilot,
not a pilot in the ship,
right? Which because if it is a pilot in the ship, then there's a lot of other problems. The homunculus fallacy, that if there's a pilot in the ship, is there a pilot inside of the pilot? It just becomes an infinite regress.
Yeah, well, that, and then also, if the ship gets hurt, why does the pilot feel it? As opposed to real pilots and real ships, he figures out that the ship's been injured because he goes and sees it and goes like, oh, right, I ran into a rock. But he doesn't know it until he goes out and sees it. Whereas if you're connected, then you know right away when you run into a rock because it hurts.
Yes.
That was, I think, the bigger problem he was trying to solve.
Yeah.
Or avoid.
Well, that certainly is the big problem. And like Wittgenstein, for example, he said, if you want a picture of the soul, consider the human body. Right. And that really is like, where is your soul? It's in the body, but it's not like located in one particular spot. right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, if I lose my hand in an accident, did I lose part of my soul?
No, but
Is it suddenly is run away from that where it gets?
but even to your fingertips, I mean, it's immediate. Like when you touch a hot stove, it's there.
But only if you're fully connected, because either through injury or through pharmaceuticals,
You could,
you
yes.
can be disconnected. So that's kind of how I think of the counter argument too. That's not my soul that's hooking me to my extremity, because I can, for various reasons, that connection can be broken.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I think that my soul is temporarily broken.
Do you see anything in Descartes that suggests that, or Spinoza?
No, I don't. Even because the best you get is in Descartes when he's talking with the princess. I have her name. Elizabeth of Bohemia.
Yes.
So she really is like poking at him, like, okay, you have this non-pilot who's not on a ship, and you have this ship. If he's not a pilot in the ship, then what's the connection?
Mm-hmm.
And he basically is like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
In Cartesian physiology, Cartesian psychology, Cartesian physics, was very influential for decades after Descartes. The Cartesians were still fighting with Newton, decades after the Principia was written by Newton. So, Descartes did just have this sort of aura of genius, and people bought into it and really fought for his ideas for a long time, even though the physics is just wrong.
Yeah.
Leibniz discovered the problem mathematically. And it has to do with force.
Yeah. I think it's the method, right? Is what is, I think, commonly agreed as to what we appreciate about Descartes. As take it down to just nothing, and then start from there, and then what can we build?
Yeah. And even Husserl from the 20th century, he wrote the Cartesian Meditations, and he said, this is something we can always do.
Yeah.
Like when philosophy gets in trouble, as it is now in the early 20th century, when
tear it all down.
It's like, just go to doubt. And we can always, just tear it down to the bare bones and then build it back up. And so there is something there. I always find Descartes, though, a little I don't know.
Too enlightened?
No, just he seems to lack a bit of seriousness about what he's actually proposing. It's kind of like a demonstration, a show. I call it a stunt show.
Yeah.
Because if you really doubt,
It's a circus act.
it's like a circus act. He's like the tightrope walker.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I'm going to doubt everything. Oh, my soul is in peril. But ta-da!
Yeah. 5 days later,
Everything turns out exactly the same as when we left.
Yeah. I was working through my software hardware dualism.
Oh, yeah.
And so I submitted my paper on that one. And then I was thinking about it later, yesterday, actually. And kind of dawned on me that until software has hardware or some other software, but that's writing within software, it's writing within, because you can have emulators that are software, but still those are in some hardware. At some point, there's hardware. So until software is is given hardware within which to operate, it's static.
Mhm.
It doesn't do anything.
Right.
It can't do anything. So maybe the cogito is the same. It's just in this realm of stasis until it's made corporeal. And now it's allowed to grow and learn and do great things, which if it's the case, then there's your meaning of life. It has to be the cogito, their soul, can't do anything. It's just trapped in stasis until it's given the corporeal body.
Yeah. I think, but the sequencing is not really necessary. So, like in Aristotle, at least this is my interpretation of Aristotle. I'm not an Aristotelian, but this is where I really credit Aristotle with something important, is that, he talks about causation very differently than the way that we talk about causation. So, you have like the material cause, which is like the matter.
Yeah.
And you have the sufficient cause, which is what we normally reduce everything to sufficient causation. And then we have like the final cause, which is the purpose, the intention.
Yeah.
The intention of an object, a thing, a substance. And so the way I read Aristotle, which, may not be right, but I don't want to pretend like I thought of this. And this isn't really the way I think because I was born in the 20th century. But these are kind of just different aspects of the substance. It's not like one occurs before the other.
Right. Yeah.
They're all simultaneous.
They come together and
it's just together. Different ways of looking at the same substance.
The implication of my thoughts around the software needing the hardware, if that's the same with the cogito, is you're not a thinking thing. You're only a thinking thing once you're corporeal.
Well,
because otherwise you're in stasis and you can't have no thoughts. You can have nothing.
Hypothetically.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's always simultaneous. The thinking and the corporality are simultaneous. There isn't one that comes first.
Well, right, that's the point. Is you can't be a thinking thing.
Well, we do think about software as existing before it is instantiated.
Sure. Because software is just one kind of idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just, and so, yeah, and it's, and I think too, in Descartes, he kind of does, he kind of backtracks, because he kind of wants to say that the soul, mind-body dualism is what he's known for.
Yeah. But
then he runs into all these problems, and he's always just kind of like that. He's kind of throwing up his hands at a lot of points, because it just, the strict dualism doesn't really work. Because everything we know, and Hume would call this, absolute proof. He would call this certain proof. Because every single time we look, we're thinking and we're corporeal. Like we've never seen an instance that disagrees with this. And we can't even conceive of an instance that would,
Well, as a corporeal being, can we even sense non-corporeal substance? It may be all around us, but we'd have no way of getting at it. Like the way, a platypus can detect the magnetic fields of other animals.
Right.
They're all around us, but I don't detect yours, and we're just right here. So just because I can't sense something I can't say that that's absolute proof of its not existing.
Except that conceptually we're talking about thinking, experiencing thinking, and being in a corporeal existence. We only experience those things together.
Well, yes, but that's maybe only because we're corporeal beings. So if you found a non-corporeal being and you were to talk to him, he would think we were the oddest things. It's like, what is this? You operate in time? You have a before and an after? What is that? It makes no sense to me.
Right. But the thing is that Hume would say, well, I can be skeptical about your hypothetical non-corporeal beings, but I really can't be skeptical about this experience of thinking and being a body. Like, I'm not really skeptical about that. I am skeptical about your hypothetical. You know,
I think that when,
like, just at a kind of almost, and he does want to say this at a gut level, it's just like there's a difference there.
so I don't think we're saying that the corporeal thinking thing doesn't exist.
Right.
Just that maybe there's more than that. Maybe the thinking thing.
But I have a very low confidence in that. I have very high confidence in corporeal thinking.
People had a high confidence in white swans for a long time too.
Well, sure. No, and he would say, if every time we've seen a swan, it's white, then all swans are white. He would say that would be a certainty.
And I show him a picture from Wikipedia of a black swan and blow his mind.
Or you might just say that's not a swan.
Because by definition,
a swan is white.
See, now whiteness is a very important factor.
Yeah, right.
You know, we have to put it back in.
Right.
I have a question on that's kind of been nagging on me. This was the 3.8.7. This is our problem that we did
3.8, yeah,
with the sound unsound argument.
Right.
Now, luckily, it was a negated universal. And I say luckily because then I kind of inherently knew I wanted a valid argument. And so that's the only reason why I knew to make it negated, a negated universal as opposed to a negated existential. But there should have been like, how do I know when it says, with the English there, when do I know to use a universal as opposed to an existential for my symbol? Because it doesn't say for every or only.
Often you can go either way.
Because
just depending on how you use the negation. When there's a negation involved.
Because if I end up with an unnegated existential, when I instantiate that, I have to use a new letter, which would kill me, right? Because I need to use the same letter as my other premises in this case. They're A's. If I end up with B's, then nothing cancels or conflicts.
Okay, so we're looking at like this particular argument.
Yeah.
This argument is unsound, or its conclusion is false, and no sound argument has a false conclusion. All right. So what are our options here? What are the differences?
Okay, so the easy ones are the first premise is a not CA.
Okay. So not CA.
And then the conclusion is a not SA. And so now
that's obvious. Okay. Because there's no quantification.
Yeah. And so now it's the second premise where we have quantification. And so the first option that I originally went with for a few minutes was not universal X.
Oops.
Didn't like that. Universal X parenthesis SX conjunction, not CX, close parenthesis. SX.
SX.
XX, yeah. No. That one's CX, but on the left. X, yeah. And then the other option is just to make that an existential, and not a negated existential instead. And one will lead you, because if
you know what? Actually,
it's only one.
Is this the way that you did it?
No, that's my first.
Okay.
That's one, and it quickly didn't work. And so I was like, well, it must be not existential, because
you can do
way to close.
You can do this, right?
That's what it turns into. Not a negated existential X.
Right.
Turns into a universal X negated everything else.
Yeah, so this is okay.
But I'm just not sure how to.
So I usually when it says no such and such, you're usually going to use not existential. That seems the most natural to me.
Okay.
But
it's talking about a one thing.
Yeah, that's the way I think about it. But both ways are fine because they're logically equivalent.
Oh, well, if you put the not to the right of the universal.
Yes.
Yeah, I know that. And because I end up starting my argument with that, what you're typing right now.
Yeah.
And then the first thing you have to do is move the negation to the right.
Right.
For the rules.
So this is my natural link. I think this most closely, it follows the intentional meaning of the English grammar, but extensionally, it doesn't matter. So symbolically, it doesn't matter.
Well,
as long as you get the negation in the right place.
That's the thing, because you see the word no, so you right away think, hey, the first thing I need to write down is negation.
Okay, then you got to think not exists, does not exist. So there is no, so you might want to sort of throw in there is.
There is no.
There does not exist a sound argument that has a false conclusion.
And that rings out as existential to you, to your ears.
Yeah.
What would be the English if it was supposed to be a universal? I guess as a way of counterexample.
And any sound argument does not have a false conclusion.
Would be a universal.
I would do that as a universal.
Okay.
But it all just depends on the way that you think about it, because at the end of the day, all we care about is extensionality.
Yeah.
And the question of, whether to use the universal or the existential formulation doesn't make a difference in terms of extensionality.
It's only because of this not. Like if they were not negated,
yes,
then
it's much more natural. No, yes, but also notice that these are logically equivalent. It's a simple adjustment. And, you know, and you know what? Sometimes I pick and choose based on what I think is going to make the tree close quicker. You know?
Well, I can imagine an argument where you don't know if the tree is supposed to close or not. And if you choose the wrong one, you might close it, but you've not really
But
answered the right question.
you can't. You just got to make sure you get the formulation correct. Universal not is the same as not existential.
I understand that.
Yeah. So those, I mean, but if the tree is going to close, but either one works.
But let's say there wasn't the negation involved when we were reading a question and we needed to know, should we use universal or should we use existential?
So like if we say a sound argument has
True conclusion,
true premises.
true premises. Because that's all sound arguments have true premises.
Yeah. But this is not there exists a sound argument that has true premises. This actually has to be
Universal.
Has to be universal.
Because your thinking is when it says no sound argument, you're thinking no particular sound argument. Like there's a singular we're interested in, you know, which is why you think of not existential.
No sound argument.
The yellow one, yeah.
Yeah. So no sound argument. To me, I do like, because the negation is out front, I'm inclined to do it this way.
Yeah.
And just read it as there is no sound argument. And there is, to me, sounds like existential quantification.
Okay.
But it also sounds to me like for every sound argument, none of them has a false conclusion.
Which gives you the universal not.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, and the more you do this conversion back and forth, which you do a lot in the truth trees,
Yeah.
the more they start to sound the same.
Well, that's why it's a question, you know, like it's the hardest,
And then-
hardest
and like I
translating the English to symbol.
And like I said, I think I do this on purpose, doing the existential quantification here, just to try to keep it closer to the grammar.
Sure.
Even
Even though there's one more row in your tree, but who cares?
But sometimes it just better represents the English grammar, and I like that. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. And there's even exercises, I think, in chapter 4, where he has you translate English into symbols, and the answers are both ways.
Okay.
Because both are correct.
Sure.
Right? So it's just, so
So for keywords,
the English grammar is intentional, has all the nuances of natural language. The symbolic construction is purely extensional. It's formal. It's mechanical. It is what it is. There's no nuance.
Yeah.
Right? Because you might be, if you get too in your head about it, a sound argument has true, because it says a sound argument.
Yeah.
You might be thinking existential, like, wow,
right.
Get yourself all tied up in a knot. But it really means every sound argument.
Sound arguments have true premises.
Yeah, sound arguments. All those things mean the same thing. All those things intend the same thing.
See, because you can read it as like in the yellow, and no sound arguments have false conclusions.
Yeah, and we could also say that of all the sound arguments, none of them has a false conclusion. And that's like universal.
That's better matches to your universal negation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So when it says no sound argument, you want to think of the set of sound arguments, and it says none of them. So it means for all of them, it's not the case.
Yeah, that's why I originally wrote universal.
But for all of them, it's not.
Yeah.
Right. This is where, like in the introduction of the book, there's the appendix with the Venn diagrams and everything.
Yeah.
That's where Venn diagrams are useful in getting your existential quantifiers correct. But if we just go through and we work through it and do the problems, it'll sink in. Yes.
Yeah.
You'll get it sorted out.
I trust you on that.
But Venn diagrams, like in the Aristotelian kind of construction, which we didn't even do in 106, right? That helps you to get your quantifiers straight when you think about sets. It's either in the set or it's not in the set. That's defined by the predicate. The predicate picks out objects in the domain. Reference.
The bird's nest with the egg in it. You put eggs in.
Yes. And that's the only semantics that formal logic allows. The only sort of meaning that we can give to the symbols without appeal to English grammar, right? When we just look at the symbols, when we look at the truth tree, the only way we can interpret it is in terms of our interpretations, which is purely extensional. And we just throw intention sense out the window. We just get rid of it. So logic, formal logic is reductive. It reduces meaning to extensionality. That's a very important aspect of this. So that's part of its power, but that's also part of its limitations. Like, we expect it to be limited in some way because we're doing a reduction right from the get-go, right? The thinking, though, in the early 20th century was that you could do this reduction and have a logic that is unbound, a kind of powerful monstrosity that will take over the world. That didn't pan out, right? And that's what that's part of the big point about incompleteness of second order logic. A different meaning of incompleteness. So these words get reused. So we have soundness gets reused, completeness gets reused.
You need to give Jeffrey a thesaurus.
But it's not his fault. I mean, this is just the way that it shook out in the 20th century. But the discovery of the incompleteness of second order logic then shows, this reductive way of thinking, like about universals and everything, trying to eliminate universals. It didn't seem right, but logic was so promising. But then incompleteness then made everybody, by the late 1930s, made everybody question the whole neo-positivist project. But of course, neo-positivists hung on, for dear life, even to this day. The Rand Corporation is largely operating within a neo-positivist framework to this day. I think they're trying to get away from that, but it's so much part of their tradition, and they get rewarded for it so much that that it's still, infecting a lot of the way that they do work. And then they're very influential within the United States imperial government, especially in terms of imperial policy, international relations, things like that.
This is still first order logic though, right? Or when you have the X and the Y's, is that?
Yeah, so when we have quantification, yes.
Oh, so
quantification, yeah, still first order. So we'll get second order a little later in the book.
Okay.
Yeah. Once we establish second order logic, then we're just building the mechanism to show that it's incomplete.
Doesn't sound particularly worthwhile. I guess so we don't erroneously use our logic.
Or go on this neo-positivist bender, right? Which Azimov to a certain degree does, right? It's a cautionary tale. And it's not that it can't be overcome. It's just that many people who have a kind of scientism belief system, a neo-positivist, anti-metaphysical, anti-humanitarian, anti-humanist, anti-democratic, totalitarian, positivist view of the world. They don't take the incompleteness of logic seriously, and sure, it can be overcome, but nobody's demonstrated, like we were saying, like with artificial intelligence, they kind of just assume that they're going to somehow, they don't know how exactly, they're just going to keep cranking data and it's just going to overcome this problem. They just have faith that, technology will overcome the logic. And we looked at that video with Chomsky, and how, that was part of his argument about scientific exploration versus what's happening with like artificial intelligence. You can just keep cranking, but it doesn't mean that you're really going. It is kind of like Descartes too. Like, Descartes was worried about this kind of stuff too. This is scientific methodology. You got to have some sort of frame of reference to make it scientific. You're not just cranking data, and hoping, it's throwing spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks.
Right.
Okay. But that's Chomsky's argument is that's not scientific, but I'm saying something kind of similar is that they're just hoping that technology somehow overcomes logic, where it seems like the more rational, more scientific way is to think about the logic and direct the technology in the direction of what you've discovered about logic.
Are they thinking that because of the shortcomings of the logic ability, that if we have enough data, we can run enough statistics and back our way into the answer?
I'm not sure. That's what I don't know. So that's what, with all the talk about artificial intelligence, these questions,
huge data sets. It's always about huge
more
data
data, more data. Just keep cranking data. Even the chat GPT, language model stuff. It's just like, well, we just fed it a bunch of data, and this is what came out.
Yeah.
What I gather is that they don't really know how it works. And it's the knowing that's science. That's literally what science means is
That's what Asimov says.
Knowing,
Eventually they get
understanding.
the first robot brains were made by people.
Uh-huh.
So they knew how they worked. But after you're at the 7th generation brain,
After
which has been
iterations.
built by robot brains.
Right.
So at this point, no human knows.
Designed by robot brains.
Right. And
Right.
so no human is so complex that none of the humans can tell you. So they have like a
Exactly.
robot psychologist who's trained to be able to talk to the 7th gen brains and then to render her opinion as to like what might happen if you do this, or if you were to tell it this, or and how certain, because it apparently it won't give you answers to certain questions if it feels that it would be harmful
To you.
to you
To
or
the
other
human being,
humans, or you might take the information and go hurt another
Right.
country,
Right.
say for instance, or whatever, and so it'll just say, I can't provide that answer to that question. And
but at least that
be catty.
you can relate back to the principles, the 3 laws of robotics. But the way we're doing it, there's no laws of robotics, right? There's no laws.
It's going to be our demise then. It's going to
I mean, right at this moment, I can't remember the company. You know, they're building robot soldiers.
Who?
Some
North Korea.
No, in like MIT, some company out of MIT, and they have demos.
Boston Scientific.
Boston Scientific. Yes,
They've been building the dogs and stuff for a while.
But I mean, they really are building, replacements for soldiers. That's their intention.
Though. You have a ways. You have like for batteries to catch up.
Well, sure.
Because they won't. I guess if they fall around behind a truck, a head generator, because they're all tethered. They can't go very long without being plugged in.
Oh, because they use so much power. Yeah.
And then the more batteries you put on them, the less payload they have for ammunition or whatever, medical supplies.
But there's no intention in regards to the 3 laws of robotics.
Oh, built in, yeah, I know. But they're not.
No.
But they're not androids in the same way. They're not yet.
No, but even like artificial intelligence, like for major corporations, when you send a resume into a major corporation, it's being reviewed by artificial intelligence before a human ever sees it.
Yeah.
There's no intention to
do no harm
there. It's just like whatever, whatever the data says. John Oliver, what did he say? He said one resume reviewer, artificial intelligence, preferred Jareds who played lacrosse. That was like a almost sure hire. If your name was Jared and you played lacrosse in high school.
Now you know.
Because that's what the data suggested.
There's this one guy one time who did really well. His name was Jared and he played lacrosse.
I guess so.